Arizona doesn't forgive weakness. And Clara Whitmore just lost everything. Her husband, her father, and the ranch that holds every memory she has left. Now the bank is counting down the days, and a gang of ruthless men is counting down the nights. One day. That's all they give her to run. Or die. But Clara makes a choice that turns grief into steel. Because when 5 outlaws ride up to take what's hers, she won't beg, and she won't break. And just when hope feels impossible, 2 U.S. Marshals appear with a plan that could save her land, or turn her home into a grave. Lesson. This story shows that real strength isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to stand anyway. If you're ready to see how Clara turns a doomed night into a new beginning, hit like, share this with someone who loves powerful Western stories, and subscribe for more inspiring cinematic tales. And tell me in the comments, would you have stayed or run? The Arizona land was a harsh and endless place under a sky that offered no comfort. 26 years of her life were scattered around the room. An old carpet bag sat on the bed, only half full of things she could not leave behind. There was her mother's brooch, a photograph of her and Thomas on their wedding day, and a couple of dresses. The young woman in that picture looked like a stranger to her now. Her father's voice still echoed in her memory, from just before the fever took him. He had said, "You cannot just leave it all, Clara. Your grandpa built this place. Thomas died for it. You cannot let them win." But it sure felt like they had already won. Clara walked through her home like a visitor from another time. In the kitchen, her father's coffee cup and plate from his last good morning still sat, unwashed. She just could not bring herself to wipe away the last piece of him. The sickness had been a thief in the night. It took Thomas first. He came back from moving cattle in a spring storm, soaked clean through but laughing it off. 4 days later, she was a widow. She had hardly started to mourn when her father took sick with the same illness. Now the only sound on the ranch was the lonesome wind. The ranch hands had moved on when the money ran out, and she did not hold it against them. She had sold off the cattle to pay the doctor and the undertaker. All that was left was the land, the buildings, and a mountain of debt that Thomas had kept secret. The bank owned just about everything. If she could not find $800 in 30 days, they would take the rest. She had $43 and a wedding ring she would not part with. The math was simple, and the odds were impossible. Clara checked the rifle by the door. It was Thomas's Winchester, all cleaned and ready. She knew how to shoot, but she had only ever pointed it at snakes and coyotes. Men like Vance Holloway were a different kind of animal. They first showed up a week after her father's funeral. Vance smiled when he offered to buy the place, showing way too many teeth. He told her, "A woman all alone cannot run a ranch like this. Sell it to us. We will give you a fair price." She had stood tall on her porch and refused. She told him the land was not for sale. Vance just kept smiling, that snake-like smile of his. "Everything is for sale, Mrs. Whitmore," he'd said. They left, but she knew they would be back. Yesterday in town, she heard folks talking. Vance and his crew had been caught driving stolen cattle. They had burned a man's home to the ground up north and killed him when he fought back. The law was a 3-day ride from here, and he was busy with other trouble. Help was not coming. Not soon enough, anyway. She went back to packing her things, folding one of Thomas's old shirts. Then she stopped. Where would she even go? A sound outside made her blood run cold. Hoofbeats coming up fast. They were early. She had planned to be gone before sunrise tomorrow, but her time had finally run out. Clara grabbed that Winchester, her hands feeling steadier than she would have guessed. She moved quiet through the house, putting out the lamps. Peeking through a curtain, she saw 5 riders take shape in the twilight. Vance sat tall in his saddle, a man who had never known a lick of fear. His men spread out, surrounding the house like they had done it 100 times before. "Mrs. Whitmore," Vance called out, his voice sounding friendly and awful all at once. "No need to be scared. Just came to see if you had changed your mind about our offer." Clara leaned against the wall, the rifle's cold barrel on her cheek. She forced herself to breathe slow and think. 5 of them. 1 of her. "I know you are in there, Clara." Vance's voice lost its friendly tone. "This is a tough country for a woman by herself. Why make it tougher?" One of his men let out a rough laugh. Then Vance's voice got dark. "Accidents happen out in these parts. Houses catch fire. Women go missing." Clara's finger rested on the trigger. She could shoot him right now, but then his men would surely end her. "I am giving you one last chance," Vance said. "Come on out, sign the papers, and you can be on a stagecoach to somewhere you belong." Those last words hit her like a punch. Somewhere you belong. As if she did not belong on the very land her family had bled for. Something inside Clara turned from grief to pure steel. She walked to the front door, rifle in hand, and called out, "You leave my land now!" There was a short silence, then Vance's cold laughter. "Your land?" "We checked with the bank, Clara. You are about 3 weeks from losing it anyway. You have got no money, no help, and no hope." "Maybe so." Clara's voice was steady as a rock. "But it is my land until the bank says otherwise, not yours." "Last chance, widow," Vance snarled. "Come out, or we are coming in." Clara pulled back the hammer on the Winchester. The loud click carried right through the door. "The first man through this door," she said, clear as a bell, "gets buried right next to my husband." The silence stretched on. Finally, Vance spoke, all pretense gone. "All right, then. We will be back tomorrow night. You have got until then to pack and clear out. After tonight, this place is ours, and it is your choice if you are still in it when we take it." The hoofbeats faded, leaving only the dark. Clara's legs gave out, and she slid down the wall. He gave her 1 day. 24 hours to decide between running or dying. After a long, sleepless night, one thing was clear. She could not fight 5 men, but she would not run. She would not hand over everything her family built. That left only one option. She had to find help. As the sun came up, Clara saddled her horse Sage and headed for the Morrison place about 8 miles north. Jack Morrison was a good man. He might get word to the marshal or lend a hand himself. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. She rode with her rifle ready, scanning the empty land. That Arizona country was beautiful and brutal, but today it just felt dangerous. The Morrison ranch finally came into view, but something was wrong. It was dead quiet. No one was in the yard, no kids were playing. She pulled Sage to a stop and called out, "Hello, Jack." The door creaked open, and Jack Morrison stepped out. Clara's stomach sank. His face was badly bruised, one eye swollen shut. His wife stood behind him, her face tight with fear. "Clara," Jack said, his voice full of pain, "you should not be here." "What happened?" she asked. "Vance Holloway happened," he said. "He and his boys came through yesterday. They warned everyone not to interfere. They said anyone who helps you gets the same." The news hit Clara like a punch. She looked at Jack's beaten face and saw her own defeat. "Jack, I am so sorry," she started. "I know," he said, cutting her off gently. "But I have a family, Clara. 3 boys. I cannot risk their lives, not even for Thomas's widow." Anger and shame washed over her. "What about the marshal?" she asked. Jack just shook his head. "He is up in Prescott for weeks. Vance knows it. That is why he is doing this now." "So we all just let him take whatever he wants?" she asked. "We survive," Mrs. Morrison said from the doorway. That was the tired truth. Clara knew she could not ask these people to die for her land. "I understand," she said, her last hope gone. She turned Sage for home. Behind her, Jack called out, "Thomas was a good man. He deserved better, so do you." The ride home felt long. Clara was in no hurry to get back to an empty house and an impossible choice. About 2 miles from her ranch, she saw them. 2 riders were coming from the west. They rode like they owned the country. Clara reached for her rifle, but then she saw the glint of metal on their chests. Badges. They were lawmen. A little bit of hope sparked inside her. She rode to meet them. The older one was lean and weathered, with a marshal's badge on his dusty shirt. His pale blue eyes looked like they had seen plenty of trouble. The younger man had the same eyes and a deputy's badge. Brothers, she figured. They looked like they knew what they were doing. The men pulled their horses to a stop. "Ma'am," the older one said, "I am Caleb Ridge, a United States Marshal. This is my brother Noah." He looked at her closely. "Are you all right?" The simple question almost broke her. "I'm managing," she said, her voice shaky. "Are y'all looking for someone?" "We are," Caleb said, his eyes sharp. "A gang of 5 men led by Vance Holloway. Do you know that name?" Clara gave a bitter laugh. "I sure do. He was at my ranch last night. He threatened to burn me out if I do not sell." A hard look came over Caleb's face, and Noah's hand moved to rest on his gun. "The Whitmore place," Caleb said. "We heard Thomas Whitmore passed. That would make you Clara Whitmore, the widow." "Yes," she said. "And if you want Vance, he will be back at my place tonight. He gave me until then to leave." Caleb and Noah shared a silent look. Then Caleb turned back to her. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have been tracking Holloway's boys for 3 months. They have robbed and killed their way from New Mexico. We need to catch them in the act." The meaning hit Clara like cold water. "You want to use my home as bait." "I want to stop them before they hurt anyone else," Caleb said plainly. "Your situation gives us a chance. We can set a trap and end this for good." Clara stared at him. He was not lying about the danger, but he was not backing down either. "You are asking me to risk my life," she said, "to stay in a house that 5 outlaws are planning to attack." "We are good at our job, Mrs. Whitmore," Noah said, his voice calm. "We have faced worse. But it is your call. If you want to leave, we will understand and try another way." Clara looked from one brother to the other. Between the 2 men, she pictured Jack Morrison's bruised face and Vance's cold grin. She thought about Thomas and her father buried in the very dirt they fought to protect. That young woman in the wedding picture who left everything behind for a better life, she deserved more than to cut and run. "What do I need to do?" Clara asked. They all rode back to the ranch together. Just 12 hours earlier, she was scared and all alone. Now she was plotting with federal marshals to use her own home as a trap. The ranch looked different now. It was no longer just a place of loss, but a battleground for justice. Inside the house, Clara put on a pot of coffee while Caleb and Noah sized up the property. Through the kitchen window, she watched them move from the barn to the corral, talking low and pointing out angles. When they came back inside, she poured 3 cups. Caleb held the warm mug in his hands. "Your husband built a solid place," he said. "Good strong walls and clear sight lines. We can work with this." "Tell me the plan," Clara said. Caleb leaned in, his voice all business. "Holloway and his boys will likely show up after dark. They'll figure you are alone and an easy target. First, they will try to scare you out. When that does not work, they will either break in or set a fire. That is when we move," Noah added. "You just stay put in the house, away from any windows. We will be in the barn and the bunkhouse, ready for them." "And if they do not surrender?" Clara asked, already knowing the answer. "Then we finish it," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Quick and permanent." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Clara set her cup down, her hands steady as a rock. "You should know I can handle a gun. My father taught me when I was 12 years old. I am no sharpshooter, but I am not helpless." Caleb looked at her with new interest. "That Winchester by the door, is it yours?" "It was my husband's, but I know how to use it." "No," Caleb said. his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your job is to stay alive, not to join a gunfight. We cannot do our job if we are worried about you." A flash of anger sparked in Clara. "This is my home. This is my fight." "Ma'am," Noah said gently, "I understand why you feel that way, but in a firefight, you are more likely to get yourself or one of us hurt. Please, let us handle this." Clara wanted to argue, but she saw the experience in their eyes. These men had done this before. Pride was one thing, but being foolish was another. "All right," she finally said, "but the rifle stays with me. If they get past you two—" Caleb gave a single, firm nod. "Fair enough. Noah, let's get set." The brothers moved like they had done this 100 times, turning her home into a trap. Caleb showed Clara the safest place in the house, a small room with thick walls and no windows. "When the shooting starts, you get in here and you stay here," he told her. "Do not come out until one of us gives you the all clear." As the sun began to set, they went over the plan one last time. Clara's part was simple but terrifying. She had to act like she was alone, lighting a lamp and moving around the house. She had to be the bait. Everything inside her screamed against it, but she had made her choice. "One more thing," Caleb said, pulling a rolled-up paper from his saddlebag. "If things go south and we do not make it, I need you to get this to the nearest lawman. It is a full report on Holloway's gang." Clara took the paper, and it felt as heavy as a stone in her hand. "Do you think things will go south?" Caleb's face softened just a little. "I think we are outnumbered by men with nothing to lose. But I also reckon we are smarter and faster. The odds are in our favor, Mrs. Whitmore. They just are not guaranteed." "Nothing ever is," Clara said softly. He held her gaze for a moment, a silent understanding passing between them. They were both survivors, people who had lost too much but were still standing, still fighting. And that had to count for something. Night fell thick and heavy. Clara lit the lamp and put it in the front window, just as they had told her. She washed a few dishes and straightened up the house, her ears straining for any sound from the darkness where Caleb and Noah were hiding. An hour crawled by, and then another. Her nerves were stretched thin as wire. Then she heard it. Horses moving fast, her heart hammered against her ribs. Clara hurried to her safe spot, clutching the Winchester with sweaty palms. Through a small crack, she saw 5 riders emerge from the dark. Vance Holloway was out front, and this time his men carried flaming torches that made their faces look like demons. "Clara Whitmore," Vance's voice echoed across the yard. "Time is up! Come on out, or we will burn you out!" Clara stayed silent, just like Caleb told her. "Set fire to the barn," Vance ordered one of his men. "If she will not listen to reason, she will listen to fire." 2 outlaws dismounted and walked toward the barn with their torches high. Clara's heart stopped. Caleb and Noah were in there. Suddenly, Caleb's voice boomed through the night. "U.S. Marshals, drop your weapons!" For a second, nobody moved. Then Vance cursed, drew his pistol, and the world exploded in gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the night from 3 different places. The outlaws scattered, firing wildly. Clara flattened herself against the wall, the sound of the gun battle a deafening roar. She gripped her rifle, wanting to help, but she held her ground. She had to trust them. A man screamed and fell in the yard, then another. The shooting got louder near the bunkhouse. Then she heard a terrible sound, splintering wood. Someone was breaking in the back door. The door crashed open and a man staggered inside, bleeding from his shoulder. He saw Clara and raised his pistol. Time seemed to stop. Clara lifted the Winchester, hearing her father's voice in her head. "Breathe, aim, squeeze." She fired. The outlaw dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. Smoke curled from the rifle barrel. Her ears were ringing. She had just shot a man. But before she could even catch her breath, she heard Caleb yell from outside, "Noah's hit! Noah's down!" Something inside Clara snapped. She ran out the door, the rifle still in her hands. The yard was a mess of bodies. One outlaw was trying to escape on a horse. Near the bunkhouse, Caleb was on his knees next to his brother. Vance Holloway stood 20 feet away, his gun aimed right at Caleb's back. "Drop it, Marshal," Vance sneered, "or you'll both die." Caleb was trapped. If he moved, he would expose Noah. If he stayed, Vance would shoot him. Clara raised the Winchester, bracing it against the doorframe. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them still. It was a long shot in the dark, with only the flickering torchlight to see by. But she had taken harder shots before. She let out a slow breath and squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit Vance in the shoulder, spinning him around. His own shot went wild into the night. Caleb moved like a flash, rolling and firing twice. Vance fell to the dirt, and the yard went quiet. She let the rifle down, her body trembling something fierce. Caleb was already over Vance, making sure the man was truly gone. The outlaw chief was dead. The marshal then hurried to his brother, his face a mask of worry. "Noah, you with me?" "I am all right." Noah's voice was tight with pain, but clear. "Took one in the leg. It is bleeding a whole lot, but I will make it." Relief washed over Caleb. He looked up and found Clara standing in the doorway, the barrel of her rifle still smoking. Their eyes locked across the ruined yard. Clara saw surprise in his gaze, and respect, and something more that stole her breath. Caleb spoke softly. "That was one heck of a shot." Clara tried to answer, but the words would not come. The strength that had seen her through the fight vanished, leaving her feeling hollow. The big rifle slipped from her grasp and clattered on the porch. She had defended her home. She had stopped 5 killers. She had also just taken 2 men's lives. The truth of it settled on her like a pile of heavy stones. Clara fell to her knees as the world spun, and she finally let the tears come. The shaking just would not quit. She knelt there on the porch, staring at her hands as they trembled. The yard was a mess of bodies twisted at odd angles, with dark stains soaking into the dirt. The sharp smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. She had killed a man. Maybe 2. The idea spun in her head, too big to grasp. "Mrs. Whitmore." Caleb's voice cut through the fog, bringing her back. "Clara, look right at me." She lifted her head. The marshal was a few steps away, his hands held out gently like he was calming a frightened horse. His shirt had blood on it, but she could not tell whose. "You did what you had to do," he said in a low voice. "Those men were here to kill you. You just defended what is yours." "I shot him." Her own voice sounded like a stranger's. "I saw him fall, and You saved my life," Caleb said, stepping closer. "And you saved Noah's too. We would both be dead if you had not made that shot. Do you understand that?" Clara wanted to believe him, but the image of the outlaw crumpling to her kitchen floor kept playing over and over in her mind. A painful groan from the yard broke her trance. Noah was trying to sit up, his face pale in the flickering light, his hand clamped over a bleeding thigh. That sight flipped a switch inside Clara. She had nursed her husband and her father in their last days. She knew what to do for a wounded man. She got to her feet, a little wobbly but moving with purpose. "He needs help. I can handle it," Noah grunted. "Just a scratch. The hell it is." Clara went down the steps, not looking at the bodies, her eyes fixed on the injured deputy. The bullet had torn right through his thigh. It missed the bone, thank goodness, but it left a nasty hole that was bleeding steady. Get him inside before he loses any more blood. Caleb was already there, helping his brother up. They brought Noah inside and laid him on the kitchen table. Clara lit more lamps with hands that had stopped shaking. She gathered her supplies, clean rags, whiskey, and a needle with thread. "This is going to sting," she told Noah as she poured whiskey onto the raw wound. Noah just clenched his jaw. Clara worked fast, cleaning the wound like she had done it 100 times. The bullet went clean through, which was a blessing. She packed the wound and wrapped it tight to stop the bleeding. "You have done this before," Caleb remarked, watching from the window. "My father was shot in a hunting accident once," Clara said, her focus on her work. "I know my way around an injury." She tied the bandage off. It was not pretty, but it would hold. Noah would be all right with some rest. "Thank you," Noah said, his voice scratchy. "I am sorry we brought this trouble to you." The apology sounded strange to her. "You did not bring it." It was already here. You just helped me fight it instead of run from it. Still, Noah looked truly sorry. This was not the plan. We should have stopped them before a single shot was fired. Caleb made a rough sound. They moved on the barn too quick. Did not give us a chance. He turned from the window, his face like stone. We need to check the area. 4 dead in the yard. 1 got away, Clara said. Caleb's jaw set hard. He might come back with friends, or he might just keep running. Either way, we have to be ready. He started for the door, but Clara reached out and grabbed his arm. The touch surprised them both, and she pulled her hand back like she had been burned. "You are going out there by yourself?" she asked. "Someone has to check the bodies," Caleb said gently. "You stay with Noah. Keep that rifle handy." He was gone, leaving Clara alone with his wounded brother. "My brother does not hand out compliments much," Noah said with a weak smile. "You really got his attention." "I shot a man," Clara said, her voice flat. "That is not something to be proud of. It is just what I had to do." "Doing what you have to do takes courage," Noah insisted. "Most folks just freeze up when things get ugly. You did not. That is what counts." Clara went to the stove and started making coffee just to have something to do. Through the window, she saw Caleb moving between the bodies, a man who knew death all too well. "How long have you two been marshals?" she asked. "Caleb for about 15 years. Me for about 8, Noah said, pushing himself up on his elbows. "Caleb is the best there is. A better tracker you will never find, and he is quicker with a gun than men half his age. And you?" Noah gave a small smile. "I am the one that keeps him from getting himself killed. He tends to rush in without thinking. Like tonight," Clara thought, using a widow's ranch for a trap. The coffee was ready. She poured 2 cups and handed one to Noah. His voice was low. "What made you stay? When Caleb planned to use your ranch as a trap, you could have said no. You probably should have. So why did you not?" Clara stared into her coffee cup. "Because if I ran, it would feel like dying. It would mean that everything my family built here was for nothing, that I was nothing." She looked up and met Noah's gaze. "And because your brother asked me like he truly believed I was strong enough, nobody has looked at me like that since Thomas died, like I was strong instead of some poor widow." Noah seemed to understand. "You are not pitiful, you are grieving. There is a big difference." "Is there?" The words tasted sour. "From where I am standing, they feel the same. They both make you feel smaller, easier for others to push out of the way." "Only if you let them," Noah said. "My brother and I, we lost our folks when we were just boys. Cholera took them both in 3 days. We were suddenly all alone. People looked at us like we were already ghosts. Caleb decided that day we would prove every single one of them wrong. The 5th one slipped away, taking 2 of our horses." "Do you think he will come back with friends?" Noah asked. "Not a chance. Those men were wanted all over. Anyone tied to them will run now that Holloway is gone." Caleb took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "But we will keep a sharp eye out tonight, just in case." Clara poured him some coffee, and their fingers brushed when she passed him the cup, a little spark gone in an instant. "What do we do now?" she asked. "About the bodies. In the morning we will take them to town. The sheriff there will see to the burials." Caleb took a long drink of his coffee. "You will need to come with us. You have to give a statement about what happened." A statement. The word felt heavy. Having to tell strangers about the fight, to live through it all again, made her stomach turn. "Just the facts," Caleb said, his voice softer now. "It was self-defense, plain and simple. Nobody is going to blame you for protecting your home." She wanted to believe him, but she knew men and women were judged differently. A man defending his land is a hero. A woman doing it is something else entirely. "I will tell them what happened," she finally said, "but I will not be sorry for it." On the table, Noah grunted. "Can we talk about this somewhere I can lie down? This table is harder than a rock." Together, Clara and Caleb helped Noah into her father's old room. He insisted he was fine, but leaned on them heavily. Once he was settled with his leg propped up, Clara set fresh water and bandages near the bed. "Try to get some rest," she told him. "I will check on that wound in a few hours." "Yes, ma'am." Noah's eyes were already closing from the pain and exhaustion. "And Clara, thank you." She left him to his sleep and found Caleb back in the main room. He was standing by the window again, watching the dark land. "You should get some rest too," Clara said. "I can stand watch." Caleb shook his head. "I have gone longer without sleep. You have been through more than enough for one night." Clara knew she ought to go to her room, but she could not bear being alone with her thoughts. "I will not sleep anyway," she admitted quietly. "Every time I shut my eyes, I see—" She did not have to finish the sentence. Caleb turned from the window. "The first time is always the hardest. The memories do not fade, but they get easier to carry." He moved to a chair by the cold fireplace and pointed to the one across from it. "Sit down. If you are going to be awake, you might as well be comfortable." Clara sat, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. For a long time, the only sound was the clock on the mantel. "Tell me about your husband," Caleb said finally. "Only if you want to." The question was a surprise. Most people acted like saying Thomas's name would hurt her. "He was a kind man," Clara began. "He was strong but never cruel. He worked hard and he treated everyone with fairness. He brought me out here because I longed for adventure, for wide-open skies. He gave me that. He gave me 7 wonderful years before the fever came. Sounds like a good man." "He was," Clara said, looking right at Caleb. "But he is gone, and I am still here. I am not sure what that makes me." "It makes you a survivor," Caleb said. "Someone who keeps fighting when others would have quit. That is a rare thing." "What about you?" Clara asked. "Is there a wife waiting for you somewhere?" Caleb's smile was quick and sad. "No wife. I was engaged one time, a long while back. She decided she could not marry a lawman. Too many lonely nights, too much worrying. She was not wrong. This life is not made for sharing. My brother and I, we travel light. It is just easier." Clara understood what he was not saying. Loneliness was the cost of his duty. The clock struck 2 in the morning. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "When you asked to use my ranch for your trap, did you really think it would work?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I thought we had a decent chance. Better odds than I usually get. But I also knew people could die. It could have been you or Noah or me. I knew that, and I asked you anyway." His clear eyes met hers. "If that makes me a bad man, I will not argue." "It makes you an honest one," Clara said. "And I made my own choice. You did not force my hand. Still, you deserved better than what this night brought." "Maybe," Clara said, pulling the shawl tighter. "But I got what I needed. My ranch is safe. And I learned something new about myself. What is that? That I am not as easy to break as I thought I was." A look of respect crossed Caleb's face. "No," he said softly. "You are definitely not breakable." The way he said it made her feel a sudden warmth. She looked away, realizing how close they were, alone in the quiet house. "You should try to get some rest," Caleb said, sensing her thoughts. "I will wake you if I see anything." Clara stood, glad for the excuse to leave. At her bedroom door, she stopped. "Caleb, thank you for trusting me." "You are welcome." "And Clara, that shot you made. 40 yards in the dark. That was something else. Your father taught you very well." A little bit of pride cut through her weariness. "He did. I just wish he could have seen it." "Maybe he did," Caleb said. She lay on her bed in the dark, her rifle close by, and waited for the sun. Sleep came and went, filled with sharp noises and terrible images. But each time she woke up, she could hear Caleb's steady footsteps in the other room, a guardian watching over her. Dawn finally came, painting the sky with color. Clara got up feeling sore and tired, but she was alive. In the kitchen, Caleb was already making coffee. He looked tired, too, with dark circles under his eyes, but he gave her a small nod. It felt like a new beginning, with tired eyes and a rough jaw. "Morning," he said, offering her a cup. "Noah is still asleep. His leg ain't bleeding through the bandages, so that is a good sign." Clara took the coffee, feeling its warmth in her hands. Outside, the morning light showed the terrible truth of the yard, the blanketed forms and the dark-stained earth. "We ought to get them to town soon," she said quietly, "before the heat sets in." Caleb nodded. They worked in a grim silence, doing what had to be done. By the time Noah came out, limping but moving, the wagon was loaded. The deputy's face was pale with pain, but his jaw was firm. "I can ride," he insisted. "You can barely stand," Clara told him. "You will ride with me in the wagon." Noah looked like he wanted to argue, but he saw the look in her eyes and just nodded. The 3-hour ride to town was long and quiet, the wagon groaning under its heavy load. People stared as they rolled into town. It was not every day you saw a widow driving a wagon of dead men, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Whispers followed them down the street. Clara sat up straight and looked ahead, showing no shame. She had only defended her home. The sheriff, a weathered man named Hartley, met them. His eyes went wide when he saw the cargo. "Good Lord Almighty," he whispered. "What happened out there?" "Vance Holloway's gang," Caleb explained. "They tried to run Mrs. Whitmore off her land. It did not end well for them." Hartley lifted a blanket to confirm it was Holloway. "I will be. We have had posters up for these fellas for months." He looked at Clara with new eyes. "You are a brave woman, Mrs. Whitmore." "I am a living woman, Sheriff," Clara said. "That is all I was trying to be." Inside, Clara gave her statement, telling the story without emotion while Caleb and Noah confirmed the details. This was clear-cut self-defense. "You will need to stay in town a day or two," Hartley said, "but you did this territory a favor." Clara felt like the walls were closing in, the air thick with pity. She had to get outside. As Mr. Hartley stood, he offered his hand. "I am truly sorry for your loss, Mrs. Whitmore. You are a mighty strong woman." She gave his hand a quick shake and escaped into the harsh afternoon sun. Leaning against a hitching post, she tried to catch her breath. Caleb came up behind her. "You holding up?" "I do not know," Clara confessed. "Everyone says I am strong, but I just feel empty inside." Caleb's voice was low. "Well, something inside you did break. The person you thought you were had to change in a hurry. That kind of thing leaves a scar." She looked at the old lawman, who seemed to understand far too much. "Does it get any easier?" "It gets different," he said. "You just learn how to carry the weight. Let's get some food. Tomorrow is a new day." The words felt too big, but he was right. Food and rest were all she could handle right now. Inside the hotel dining room, all eyes were on her, Caleb, and Noah. Let them stare. She was far too worn out to care. They ate the simple beef stew and bread in silence. The meal seemed to bring a little life back to Noah. "So what is next?" Clara asked. "For you two, I mean." "We have to wait on the territorial office," Caleb explained. "We file our reports and collect any bounties. That will take a few days." Then his eyes met hers. "Then we move on. There is always another town that needs the law." Of course. She knew these men were just passing through. Soon she would be alone again with her ranch and a future she had to piece together from ruins. The thought stung more than it should have. "What about you?" Noah asked. "You gonna stay at the ranch?" Clara thought about it. Just yesterday she was ready to run. Now the danger was gone, but the debt was not. That impossible $800. "I do not know if I can," she said. "The bank will foreclose in 30 days if I cannot pay." "How much is it?" Caleb asked. $800. I have 43. The numbers hung in the air, cold and final. "There might be another way," Noah said after a moment. "The government sometimes pays folks who help capture outlaws. You gave us a place to stay and helped us out. That has to be worth something." "How much?" Clara asked. Caleb and Noah shared a look. "Hard to say," Caleb admitted. But that, plus the bounty money, might get you close. A little bit of hope started to flicker inside Clara, but she pushed it down. Even if I get the money, I cannot run that ranch by myself. I would need to hire hands, buy cattle. Maybe it is better to just let it all go. Is that what you really want? Caleb asked, his gaze steady. To give up on what you fought so hard for? I do not know what I want, she said honestly. I am just so tired of fighting. Caleb leaned forward. Then you need to rest. Do not make big life decisions when you are grieving and worn to the bone. That is when people make their worst mistakes. His words made sense. Clara nodded, feeling a small bit of relief. Caleb got them rooms for the night, one for her and another for him and his brother. At her door, Clara paused. Thank you for everything. For believing in me. We will see this through, Caleb promised. We have to make sure you are safe and the paperwork is done right. He stood close enough for her to smell the scent of leather and sage. For a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. Then Caleb stepped back. Get some real rest, Clara. You have earned it. Inside her room, she closed the door and felt his presence linger. Clara washed the dust and blood from her face. The woman looking back from the mirror was a stranger. Her eyes were hollow, and her face looked harder. This woman had fought for her life and won. Maybe, she thought as she climbed into the clean sheets, she was someone worth getting to know. The sounds of a new day woke Clara. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She dressed in yesterday's clothes, catching her reflection in the mirror. She looked like she had aged 10 years in one night. Downstairs, Caleb was already drinking coffee and reading a telegram. Morning, he said, pouring her a cup. I have got some news. The territorial office confirmed the bounties. $400 in total. It is a start. A start. But with her $43, she was still well over $300 short. The cold math of it was a punch to the gut. And we are still waiting to hear about the compensation Noah mentioned, Caleb added. How did you sleep? Better than I thought I would, she admitted. I cannot recall any dreams. That is good, Caleb said. The bad dreams usually show up later. His easy talk of such things told her he was no stranger to violence and loss. Noah joined them, limping but looking better. My leg is stiff, he grumbled, but I will live. They ate breakfast while discussing business. The outlaws' horses and guns would be auctioned off by the territory. Everything was being handled by the book, turning violence into neat paperwork. Clara mostly listened, watching the two brothers. They moved and spoke with an easy comfort that came from years spent side by side. It made her feel a sharp pang of loneliness. After their meal, Caleb suggested they ride out to her ranch to see what needed to be done. Noah decided to stay in town to rest his leg. It was a long trip. So Clara and Caleb rode back to the ranch together. The place looked smaller in the daylight. Dark stains marked the dirt in the yard, and bullet holes scarred the barn wall. Clara swung down from her horse, her legs a bit shaky. Caleb was right there, his hand gently steadying her elbow. You all right? He asked. Just tired, she answered, pulling away softly. Let me see what mess they made of the house. Inside, the only real damage was the back door, hanging crooked where an outlaw had kicked it in. Clara stared at the splintered wood, the memory of that moment flooding back. I can fix that, Caleb said from the doorway. It will not be pretty, but it will hold. He was already heading for his horse. Besides, it gives me something to do while you figure out what is next. While he worked, Clara walked through the quiet rooms. Nothing was stolen. They had wanted the land, not her belongings. Everything her family had built was still here, waiting on the dresser. His pocket watch, its hands frozen at the moment of his death. His well-used Bible lay beside it. Her father's words came back to her. Your granddaddy built this place. Do not let them take it. But the fight was not over. Now she faced debt and the lonely work of running 200 acres all by herself. She picked up the watch. Her grandfather had carried it across the country to build a life here. What would he think if she gave up now? Clara, Caleb called out. Door is fixed. She went to see his handiwork. The door was solid, braced with wood from the barn. Thank you, she said, testing the latch. It felt secure. You did not have to do that. It beats sitting around a hotel, Caleb said. Listen, I have been thinking. You have options. The bounty money will help, but there are other ways to handle this. He nodded toward the window at land that stretched out as far as the eye could see. 200 acres is a mighty big piece of country. You could sell off a parcel or lease out the grazing rights for some steady money. Clara had turned these thoughts over in her mind during many a sleepless night. Hearing them said out loud made them feel all too real. But that still leaves me trying to run a ranch all by myself. I can't be everywhere at once. Fixing fences, looking after livestock, keeping the buildings up. Thomas and my daddy could barely manage it working together. So you hire a hand. And pay him with what? Her voice was sharp with frustration. Even if I hold on to the land, I'm starting from scratch. It could take years to turn a profit. Years you'd have, though. Years to do it your way. Caleb stepped a little closer, his eyes locked on hers. Clara, I have seen plenty of folks run off their land. They did not have a choice. You do. The danger is gone. The debt is something you can handle if you're clever about it. The only thing left to ask is if you want it bad enough to fight for it. His words felt like a challenge, and they lit a fire inside her. It might have been defiance, or maybe just the stubborn pride she got from her granddaddy. I want it, Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. I'm just scared I will fail. Scared I will pour my whole self into this place just to lose it to a drought or bad luck. If I walk away now, at least it is my decision. Leavin' is failin', Caleb said, his tone flat and certain. Not because there is shame in it, but because you will spend the rest of your days wondering what if. And that wonderin' will eat you alive, worse than any hardship you will face right here. Clara wanted to argue, but she knew deep down he was right. She had already pictured that life, cooped up in her aunt's little house, watching the years slip by, always asking herself if she could have made it work. How long can you stay? The words came out before she could stop them. You and Noah, I mean. Caleb looked a little surprised. A few days at least. Why? Because I need help thinking this through, she said, looking him square in the eye. Not just the money part. I need to know what it really takes to run this place alone. What is possible and what is just plain foolish. You said you would see this through. I am asking you to help me see it clear. He just looked at her for a long moment, like he was reading a letter. Then, he gave a slow nod. All right, let's take a look at what you have got. They spent that afternoon going over the whole property. Caleb walked the fence lines, checked the well, and looked over every building. His questions about irrigation and markets showed he knew his business. My folks had a place up in Kansas, he told her when she said as much. Before the sickness took them, I worked that land every single day. I know what it demands. By sundown, they had a decent idea of things. The ranch was in good shape, fundamentally. Good water, good grass. The buildings needed work, but they were salvageable. They sat on the porch while the sun bled all over the sky, looking at the plan Caleb had sketched out. It is doable, he said at last. It will be tight, but you can do it. You would have to hire help for the heavy work, but you could handle the day-to-day. Clara stared at the notebook, at a future she could almost touch. Why are you helping me like this? You hardly know me. Caleb looked off into the distance. Because I know what it feels like to have it all snatched away. And I know what it means to fight back and not let that loss be your whole story. He turned to her then, his expression raw. You remind me of my mother. She kept our homestead going for 2 years by herself after my father passed. She never quit. I see that same fight in you. His words touched a deep part of her soul. To be understood like that was a gift she never knew she needed. Thank you, she said, the words feeling small but coming straight from the heart. For all this, for believing I can do it. It is possible, he replied. The only question is, do you believe it? Clara looked out at her home, soaked in the last light of day. This place was hers. "I believe it," she said, the feeling settling deep in her bones. "I am staying." Caleb gave her a quick, real smile. "Good. Then tomorrow we will go to town and have a talk with that banker." They rode back as the lamps in town started to glow. Noah was in the hotel dining room looking much better. "Got some news," he said as they took their seats. A telegram came. "They are approving compensation for your help. $600, paid within 30 days. $600. On top of the $400 from the bounty, that was $1,000. Enough to pay the bank, buy supplies, and get a real start. That is," she could not get the words out. "That is, you keeping your home," Noah finished for her, his voice gentle, "if that's what you want." Clara looked at the two brothers who had ridden into her life just 3 days ago and turned it all upside down. "I want it," she said, "and I am grateful, more than I can rightly say." They celebrated that night with a fine meal of steak and potatoes. Noah even talked her into trying some whiskey. It burned on the way down, but warmed her right up, loosening a knot she had been carrying since Thomas died. They started talking, and Noah told stories of their time as lawman. Caleb would chime in with a detail or a dry remark that made Clara laugh. It was a strange sound, one she had not heard from herself in months. It felt good to remember she was still alive. "What about you?" Noah asked her. "How did a lady from Philadelphia end up way out here in Arizona?" "I was a school teacher, living a quiet life," she began. "Then Thomas came to town. He told me about this place, about the big sky and the possibilities. 3 months later, we were married and heading west." "Any regrets?" Caleb asked softly, "about coming here?" "Never," she said, meeting his gaze. "The life I chose, I would still choose it today, over the safe one I left behind." An unspoken understanding passed between them. They were cut from the same cloth, all three of them. Folks who chose the hard road over the easy one. Later, at her door, Caleb gave a nod. "Tomorrow we face the bank, and whatever they throw at us, we will handle it." His confidence was all she needed. She fell asleep that night with a new feeling rising in her chest. It felt an awful lot like hope. The morning sky was heavy with clouds, hinting at a rain that might never fall. Clara put on her best dress, a dark blue one, ready for whatever the day had in store, that Thomas had given her. She needed to look like a respectable woman, not a widow begging for scraps. Caleb and Noah were waiting for her, looking official in clean shirts and polished badges. The bank was a sturdy building of brick and brass. Clara remembered coming here with Thomas to sign the loan papers that now felt like a chain around her neck. A clerk greeted them, his polite smile fading when he recognized Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Harrison is waiting for you." They were led to an office where a large man with fancy whiskers sat behind a big desk. Marcus Harrison looked at her with pity. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, "a terrible business at your ranch." His gaze then shifted to the two men with her. Caleb set his badge on the desk. "U.S. Marshal Caleb Ridge. This here is Deputy Marshal Noah Ridge. We are here about Mrs. Whitmore's loan." Harrison's friendly look tightened. "The loan is a private matter. Mrs. Whitmore helped us capture wanted men, at great risk to herself." Caleb cut in, his voice all business. "The territorial government is paying her for that help. We are here to make sure you understand her new financial situation." Clara saw the change in Harrison's face. He was recalculating everything. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, that is good news. However, the loan is still $800, due in 30 days. "We know," Noah said, leaning forward. "Mrs. Whitmore will have $1,000 by then. That is enough to pay you and have money left over." Harrison looked shocked. $1,000? How? "Bounty payments and compensation," Caleb stated plainly. "The real question is if this bank wants to keep a client who is about to pay her debt, or if we should suggest she take her money somewhere else." It was a bold move, as there was no other bank for 50 miles. But Harrison did not know that. No, of course, we value Mrs. Whitmore's business, he said, his smile looking slick. I'm just surprised. Last time she was here, things seemed so grim. Things change, Clara said, her voice steady. I am ready to pay what is owed, Mr. Harrison, and from now on I expect this bank to treat me like any other customer, not like some charity case. Harrison's slick smile disappeared. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. No disrespect was meant. They settled the details. Clara would pay her debt in full as soon as the government funds came through. Walking out of that bank and into the bright afternoon sun, Clara felt 100 pounds lighter. She still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, it felt like her road to choose. That went pretty well, Noah said with a grin. Did you see his face when Caleb mentioned the federal government? I thought he was going to swallow his own tongue. You did not have to do that, Clara said. Threaten him like that. Did not have to, Caleb agreed. But fellas like Harrison only understand power. Asking him nicely would have gotten you nowhere. Showing a little muscle earned you some respect. Clara could not argue with that. Well, thank you, both of you. The debt was settled, the threat was gone, and her home was safe. For the first time in a long time, Clara Whitmore felt free. Clara bought what she needed to start over. Garden seed, fencing tools, and the basics like flour and coffee. She even had lumber coming for the barn and hired a strong hand from town. Every dollar she spent felt like putting down roots. This was her life now, the one she was choosing, not the one she had dreamed of. That night, a heavy quiet settled over them in the hotel dining room. Tomorrow, Caleb and Noah were leaving. Their job was done. The outlaws were caught, and Clara was safe. They had other places to be, other wrongs to right. The meal was quieter than before. Clara found herself trying to memorize the little things. The way Caleb's hands wrapped around a coffee mug, the sound of Noah's deep laugh. Soon they would just be a story she told herself. After supper, Noah made his excuses, saying his leg needed rest. But Clara knew he was giving her and Caleb a moment to say goodbye. They walked through the cool night air as the first stars began to dot the sky. For a long time, neither of them said a word. You're going to do just fine, Caleb finally said, his voice low. You're a whole lot tougher than you give yourself credit for. I'm scared down to my bones, Clara confessed. Every time I think about running that place by myself, I just freeze up. Being brave ain't about not being scared, Clara. It's about being scared to death and doing it anyway. He stopped walking and turned to face her under the lamplight. You already proved you got that in you. What you did at the ranch, choosing to stay and fight, most folks don't find that kind of courage in their whole lives. Clara looked into his pale eyes. I couldn't have done it without y'all. Maybe not, he said, his voice softening. But we won't be there for what's next. You'll do that on your own, and you'll make it work. I know you will. The finality in his tone was a sharp pain. She knew this was always temporary, that a man like Caleb Ridge was never meant to stay in one place. Will you ever, she started, then stopped, trying to find the right words. If you're ever back this way, will you stop by? A look of regret flickered across Caleb's face. I don't know. Things are quiet here now. It might be years before the law brings me back. Years. The word hung in the air between them. I see, she said. Though she didn't, not really. She couldn't understand how he could turn her world right side up and then just ride away. Clara. Caleb lifted his hand like he was going to touch her cheek, but let it drop. If things were different. If I was a different kind of man. He didn't have to finish the sentence. Clara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. But you're not. No, I'm not. They just stood there in the dark, two people brought together by trouble and torn apart by the lives they led. Clara wanted to argue, to say that people could change, but she knew better. Thank you, she said instead. For everything. For seeing that I wasn't helpless. You saved your own place, Clara, Caleb corrected her gently. I just helped you see that you could." They walked back to the hotel without another word. At her door, Caleb paused. "We're leaving at sunrise. It's easier that way." Clara just nodded, unable to speak. "You take care of yourself, Clara Whitmore," he said. "And don't ever let somebody tell you that being strong ain't for a lady. You're exactly the woman you're supposed to be." And with that, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall. Clara lay awake for most of the night, alone with a feeling that was equal parts gratitude and grief. Tomorrow she would go home and begin the hard work of building a life from the ashes. It was what she wanted. It was what she had to do. It was a victory, the one she had chosen. So why did it feel just like another loss? The sun came up way too fast, its pale light finding Clara already dressed and staring out the window. Her bag was packed and waiting by the door. She would be heading back to the ranch all by herself today, to start picking up the pieces. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. It was Noah, already in his traveling clothes with his saddlebag slung over a shoulder. He said, "Caleb is settling up downstairs, but I wanted a word with you first." Noah came in and faced her, his eyes warm. "You are going to do just fine out there," he told her. "You have got real backbone, Clara. Not many folks do." She did not know the word that way. He meant grit, a toughness that runs deep. Noah gave a small smile. "Caleb sees that in people. It is why he helped you. He saw something in you worth saving." Clara felt her throat tighten. "He is a good man." Noah nodded. "He is also as stubborn as a mule, which is why I'm telling you this. My brother does not let folks get close. He keeps a distance because it is safer for everyone. But somehow you got past his defenses. I have been watching how he looks at you when he thinks no one is looking. What happens to you matters to him, and that scares him half to death." Clara was speechless. The thought of Caleb Ridge caring for her felt both impossible and like a prayer being answered. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked in a soft voice. "Because it was not easy for him to leave. And if he ever comes riding back this way, you ought to know what it really means." Noah picked up his bags and headed for the door. "You take care of yourself, Clara." He was gone before she could answer, leaving her with a revelation that turned her world upside down. She found Caleb in the lobby paying their bill. He was his usual self, calm and professional, giving nothing away. But now, Clara could see the walls he built around himself. "Ready?" he asked, his voice all business. "As I will ever be." They walked to the livery in a comfortable silence. Her horse, Sage, nickered a hello, and the familiar sound gave her comfort. Caleb checked his own horse's gear with practiced hands. "The stagecoach comes through twice a week. You can get supplies sent from the freight office if you need." "I know," she said, busying herself with her saddle. "I have lived here 7 years, Caleb." He just nodded. "Of course." Outside, Noah was already on his horse, giving them some space. Caleb swung into his saddle, then looked down at her. For just a second, his professional mask fell away, and she saw something raw underneath. "Clara," he started, but then stopped. "Just you take care. Do not take foolish risks. And if trouble finds you, send for help. Do not try to face it all alone." "I will not," she promised. "And thank you, Caleb, for everything." He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent understanding passing between them. That look he gave her was a goodbye, an apology, and a promise, all rolled into one. He tipped his hat, then turned his horse and followed his brother out of town. Clara watched them go, just 2 men riding toward whatever justice the frontier had in store. She stayed put until they were nothing more than a puff of dust against the sky. Then she mounted Sage and pointed her home. The long ride back to the ranch felt heavier than usual, with loneliness sitting square on her shoulders. But when she saw her home come into view, something inside her settled. This place was hers. She had fought for it and paid the price in sorrow and grit. She spent the day turning her feelings into hard work, scrubbing the porch and mending the barn. Her body ached, but her mind was finally clear. As the sun set, she sat on the porch with her father's journal. He had written down everything he learned the hard way. Reading his words, she could almost hear his voice. "You were right, Papa," she whispered. "I can't let them win. I won't." It felt like a solemn vow. The days soon found a steady rhythm. Clara woke with the sun and worked until she was too tired to dream. She planted a garden and mended fences until her shoulders ached. Samuel, a strong 18-year-old, came by twice a week to help with the heavy lifting. Then the money came. First, the territorial compensation arrived, $600 in clean bills that felt like a fortune. A week later, she collected the bounty payments. She walked straight into the bank and paid off her entire debt. The banker, Marcus Harrison, gave her a slick smile. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Whitmore." "I will keep that in mind if I ever need a loan in the future," Clara replied, her voice cool as ice. She had no plan to ever owe him another dime. With her land free and clear, she could finally think about tomorrow. She bought 6 good cows to start a new herd, got some chickens for eggs, and purchased seeds for a bigger garden. She was no longer just hanging on. She was building something new. The weeks turned into months, and the summer sun baked the land. Clara learned quick to work with the rising and setting sun, escaping the brutal heat of the Arizona midday. The sun turned her skin to leather despite her bonnet, and her hands grew rough with calluses. Her whole body became lean and strong, forged in hardship. She was a new woman, not the one who followed her husband out west, and not the widow lost in grief. She was tougher now, shaped by fire and loss. But Lord, the loneliness was the hardest part. It was a deep, aching quiet. She started talking to the barn cats, to her daddy's memory. And sometimes, late at night, she'd talk to Caleb. She'd tell him how the garden was flourishing, or about the new calf. It felt foolish talking to a man long gone, but it helped fill the silence. 2 whole months after he and his brother left, the stagecoach driver handed her a letter with a knowing look. It was from the marshal's office in Prescott. Her hands trembled as she saw Noah's handwriting. The letter was formal, all business. But tucked inside was a smaller note, with different handwriting. It said, "Heard you paid your debts and are buying cattle. Good work. I told you that you were tougher than you knew. C.R." Clara read those few words until she knew every curve of Caleb's writing by heart. He had been thinking about her. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. It was proof she hadn't vanished from his mind. She wrote back to Noah that very night, but her words were meant for Caleb's eyes, too. She kept her tone cheerful, talking about the ranch's progress, but she never mentioned the loneliness. Letters started to pass between them every few weeks, mostly from Noah, but sometimes Caleb would add a short line or two. As the months went on, her own letters became more honest, sharing the sweet victory of a good harvest or the frustration of a busted water pump. Summer bled into a cool autumn, and Clara hired on a few local hands, including Samuel, for the fall roundup. It wasn't the huge operation her husband, Thomas, had run, but it belonged to her. She had built it from scratch with pure grit and smart decisions. The cattle fetched a good price, giving her enough money to last the winter and expand in the spring. She was really making it work. Yet the success felt empty with no one to share it with. She tried her best not to dwell on Caleb, on his steady gaze and capable hands. He was a lawman, always on the move, with no place for ties. She knew that, but her heart kept a foolish little flicker of hope alive. Winter settled in, painting the grass with morning frost. The long, dark nights made the loneliness feel sharper. She would reread his brief notes, trying to find a deeper meaning in his words. Then, near the end of November, a different kind of letter came. This one was longer, and every word was written in Caleb's hand. He wrote about chasing rustlers through the mountains of New Mexico and how Noah had taken a bullet but was healing up. He talked about the endless miles and the constant danger. Then the last paragraph changed everything. It said, "I think about Arizona. I think about a woman brave enough to face 5 armed men. I wonder if she's still fighting, still refusing to give up. I surely hope so. The world needs more people like that." C.R. Clara's hands were shaking as she put the letter down. This was more than just a friendly note. It felt like a confession. She wrote back right away, her own letter longer and more honest than ever before. She told him about her success, but then she told him the whole truth. I think about how you helped me see I was strong, not broken. The ranch is doing well, but some nights this big old quiet is just too much to handle alone. I hope you find your way back here someday. The coffee pot is always on, and there will always be a spot for you at my table. C.W. She sent the letter before she could lose her nerve. The winter got colder. She marked Christmas by herself with a nice meal, the silence of the house weighing on her. January brought the anniversary of her husband's death. She rode into town and stood by the cold gravestones. I did it, she whispered to them. I made the ranch work. The wind was her only reply. When she got back home, a rider was waiting. He wore a marshal's badge, and his horse looked like it had been ridden hard. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Something was wrong. The deputy dismounted. Mrs. Whitmore, I have a personal message for you from Marshal Ridge. Is he all right? Clara barely got the words out. He's fine, ma'am. So is his brother, the man said, handing her an envelope. He told me to deliver this myself. She waited until the deputy was gone before she tore it open. It was from Caleb. The handwriting was rushed. Clara, I am putting in for a transfer to the Arizona Territory. If it's approved, I'll be based out of Prescott. That means I will be in your part of the country on a regular basis. I needed you to hear it from me first. If this is not what you want, just say the word and I will pull the request. But if you meant what you said about the coffee and a place at your table, I'd sure like to find out if there's something real between us. Clara read the letter 3 times, her world tilting on its axis. He was coming back. Not just passing through, but coming back to stay. He was willing to set aside the distance he had always kept between them, and he was doing it for her. After months of proving she could survive all on her own, she now had a choice. Not a choice of need, but a choice of the heart. And in the cold January air, that felt like the warmest sunrise she had ever seen. She was getting a chance to let someone new into her life. It was a risk to care if someone would stay or go. She could have said no, could have told him it was best to leave things be. But that just would not have been the truth. Clara went inside, took out a pen and paper, and wrote from the heart. Dear Caleb, I have read your letter so many times I know it by heart. Yes, I meant every word about the coffee. Yes, I would like to see what could happen if we were not always so far apart. And yes, I am scared to death of losing someone again. But I am also tired of being so alone. If you are willing to take a chance, then I am willing to hope again. The ranch will be here. I will be here. Come when you can. C.W. She mailed the letter the next day, feeling a mix of hope and fear. Then she got back to work, trying her best not to count the days. February came and went. March brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. Her cattle were healthy and her home was secure. Against all odds, she had made it through the winter all by herself. It was a bright March morning when she saw a rider coming from a long way off. Something about the way he sat in the saddle felt familiar. Clara's heart began to pound. As he got closer, she knew for sure. It was Caleb Ridge, riding toward her ranch like he belonged there. Clara put down her tools and walked to meet him. She knew she was covered in dust, with her hair all tangled by the wind. She was not the same broken woman he had met 9 months ago. She was the woman she had to become to survive. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, his eyes taking everything in. He saw the repaired barn, the healthy cows, and Clara standing proudly on her land. You have done well, he said, his voice full of warmth and respect. Better than well? I had good advice, Clara said, her throat feeling a little tight. And a good reason to make it work. He swung down from his horse and walked toward her, not quite sure of his welcome. But Clara was done being uncertain. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. For a second, Caleb was completely surprised. Then his arms wrapped around her, pulling her in tight, and he kissed her back with all the feeling of 9 long months of holding back. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb looked at her with an open, hopeful expression she had never seen before. "I got the reassignment," he told her. "My new post is in Prescott, so I will be covering this whole area. I will be riding through here on my circuit." "How often is that?" Clara asked, her hand still on his chest. "As often as you will have me," he said, his voice growing husky. "Clara, I am not good at this sort of thing. For 15 years I have kept my life simple. But I just cannot do that with you. I think about you all the time." "Then you can stop pretending," Clara said softly. "I am here. You are here. I think we are both done running from things that scare us." A slow, genuine smile spread across Caleb's face. "Just like that." "Just like that," she confirmed, stepping back. "Now come on inside. I owe you a cup of coffee, and I always keep my promises." They walked toward the house together, toward whatever came next. The land stretched out around them, a quiet witness to all the endings and new beginnings. It was a testament to the strength of people who simply refused to give up. She knew her father and Thomas would be proud. She had honored them by fighting for her home. Now she would honor them by choosing to truly live again. The future was a mystery, but for the first time in a long, long time, she was not afraid of it. Sometimes the best things in life come from the choices that scare you the most. You have to open the door to what could be, even when every part of you wants to stay locked up safe. Sometimes being brave means standing up to bad men with guns. And sometimes it just means letting someone into your heart after you have built a whole life around being on your own. Caleb sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same one where she had once tended to Noah's wounds. The air between them was filled with unspoken hopes. "So tell me about Prescott," Clara said, trying to keep her feet on the ground. "What does this new job really mean?" Caleb put his coffee cup down, his gaze steady and warm. "I will be covering the Northern Territory. That is about 8 towns and 40 ranches spread out over 200 miles. I will ride the circuit, keep the peace, and track down outlaws when I have to. That means I will be on the move more than I am still, but you will pass through." Clara heard the hope in her own voice. "Every 2 weeks or so. Sometimes sooner, if a case points me this way." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Clara, you have to understand what you would be getting into. I will not always be there when you need me. There will be long weeks when you are all on your own, times when I am facing down dangerous men. This is not a normal courtship. I buried 2 men I loved and fought off 5 outlaws to keep my home," Clara said, her voice low but steady. "I think I understand that life does not offer safe outcomes." A small smile touched Caleb's lips. "Fair enough. But knowing it and living it are different. I have seen what this life does to the people a lawman loves, the constant worry, the waiting. I need to know you can handle that." Clara reached over, her hand covering his. "I spent 9 months learning to handle being alone. I can handle more, if it means having you in my life, even in pieces." Something in his expression broke open. His hand turned under hers, his fingers lacing through hers, holding on tight. "I thought about you every single day," he confessed, his voice rough with feeling. "I tried to tell myself it was just professional concern, but that was a lie. You got under my skin that first day, standing on that porch with a rifle ready to die for what was yours. I knew how to use it," Clara said mildly. "I just had not shot a man before. No, you had lost everything, and you were still standing, still fighting." Caleb's thumb drew slow circles on her palm. "That kind of strength is rare. In 15 years, I have seen most people crumble in their worst moments. You did not." Heat rose in her cheeks at his praise. "I had help. You and Noah gave me a choice when I had none. We gave you the tools. You did the work," he said, pulling his hand back as if remembering his duty. "Which brings me to why I am here. I am making my first official trip through the territory. I needed to see you, but I also need to understand what I am dealing with out here. The change from personal to professional was sudden, but she understood. What do you need to know? She asked. Everything. Who the important people are. What troubles are brewing just under the surface? Which ranchers can be trusted? You have lived here for 7 years. You know this place better than any report. Clara poured them both more coffee and spent the next hour teaching him the ways of the northern Arizona territory. She spoke of family feuds over water, a belligerent prospector, and the rising tension between ranchers and new homesteaders. Caleb listened with deep focus, taking it all in. You would make a good deputy, he said when she finished. You see people clearly. I will stick to ranching, Clara said with a dry smile. One shootout is enough for one lifetime. His expression grew serious. Have you had any trouble since I left? Anyone bothering you? A few remarks in town. Some folks suggesting I ought to remarry for my own protection, she said with a hint of annoyance. Marcus Harrison at the bank has been especially insistent that a woman needs a man's guidance with money. Want me to have a word with Harrison? Caleb's voice was quiet, but his eyes had gone hard as stone. No, I can handle Marcus Harrison, Clara said with a small smile. But I appreciate the offer. He told her about cases he and Noah had worked on since they left. Rustlers, a stagecoach robbery, and endless miles of riding. Noah is thinking about settling down, Caleb said, surprising her. He met a woman in Santa Fe, a widow with 2 kids. It is serious. How do you feel about that? Clara asked gently. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Proud of him. He deserves a happy, normal life. But it will be strange working alone after all these years. We have been a team since we were boys. You will not be alone, Clara said softly. You will have people here. You will have me. Caleb's eyes met hers, more vulnerable than she had ever seen. Will I? Because, Clara, I have to know what this is. I cannot do halfway. I cannot court you wondering if you are just grateful or just lonely. The question was blunt, but she was glad for his honesty. I am, she admitted, a little bit grateful. And yes, I was lonely, so lonely it felt like the quiet was going to swallow me whole some nights. But that is not why I kissed you. It is not why my heart takes off running when I see you coming up the trail. She looked him square in the eye. I care for you, Caleb Ridge. Not for what you did, but for the good, decent man you are. You see me as strong, not some delicate flower. So if you are asking if I want to see where this goes, the answer is a wholehearted yes. Caleb rose from his chair and walked around the table to her. He pulled her up gently, his weathered face just a breath away from hers. I am not an easy man to love, he said softly. I am gone more than I am here, and I carry a hard life with me. But what I feel for you is real, and it is deep, and frankly it scares the daylights out of me. Good, Clara whispered back. I am scared too. Guess that makes us even. He kissed her then, slow and sure. Clara felt a lock on her heart, one that had been there since her Thomas passed, finally click open. This was not a betrayal. This was choosing to live again. I need to finish my rounds, but I will be back in 10 days, he said, his forehead resting against hers. And when I return, I would like your permission to court you proper. Let folks know my intentions are serious. Permission granted, Clara smiled, though you best be ready for the town gossips to have a field day. Let 'em talk, he grumbled. I do not give a hoot what anyone thinks as long as I know where you stand. I am sure, she said, looking right at him. Scared, but sure. Clara watched him ride off, her heart a mix of hope and fear. She was risking the peaceful life she had fought so hard to build, all for the chance that love was worth it. Those 10 days crawled by. She threw herself into her work on the ranch, fixing fences and planning for the spring, but her mind was always on the calendar. A letter came from Noah congratulating her and teasing that his brother was a stubborn mule but loyal to the bone. It made her smile. Just as he promised, Caleb rode in 10 days later, covered in dust and weariness, but his whole face lit up the second he saw her. Good trip? Clara asked as he stepped onto the porch. Long, he said, pulling her into a hug and kissing her like a man starved. But successful. I missed you something fierce. Over a simple dinner of beef stew and bread, he told her about his circuit. Your information about the Morris place was spot on. I got him to agree for now, but it will need watching. So you will be back around, she said, more a statement than a question. Every 2 weeks, regular as a clock. I know it is not much time, he said, taking her hand. You deserve a man who is here every day. It is enough, Clara told him firmly. I would rather have parts of you than have no one at all. And so they built a life in the moments between his work. He would ride in for a day or two, and they learned each other's ways. They learned about the quiet moods that fell on him when a case was heavy. And he learned she needed to talk things through, even the hard stuff. They were two people marked by loss. He had lost his folks young. She had lost her husband. But instead of pushing them apart, those old wounds gave them common ground. They saw the same grit in each other, the same will to keep on going no matter the hurt. It was not a normal courtship. He could not take her to church socials, but he fixed her busted fences and helped with the heavy chores. They would sit on her porch in the evenings, talking under the stars. He learned that her strength did not mean she never needed a shoulder to lean on, and she learned when he just needed silence. Slowly but surely, what started as a spark grew into something that felt as solid and real as the earth beneath their feet. Summer came on, hot and bright. The ranch was doing well. Her herd was up to 20 head, and her garden was overflowing. The place was hers, and it was thriving. One hot June evening, 6 months after it all began, Caleb rode up holding a small wooden box. Clara met him on the porch, seeing a nervousness in him she had never seen before. "What is wrong?" she asked right away. "Nothing is wrong." He tied his horse, his hands not quite steady. "But I have got to ask you something, and I am terrified of what you will say." He came up the steps, holding that box like it was precious cargo. "Clara, I am 43 years old. I have spent my life avoiding getting tied down, telling myself I was better off alone. Then I met you, and you turned all that upside down." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band. This was my mother's wedding ring. It is the only thing I have of hers. I'm asking you to wear it. Marry me. Build a life with me in the time we can steal away. I cannot promise I will always be here, but I swear I will always come back to you. Clara looked from the ring to his face, a face that showed every hard mile he had ever traveled. She thought about the life she had built all by herself, the independence she cherished. Marriage meant sharing everything, the good and the bad. It also meant she would not be alone anymore. It meant having a partner. "Yes," Clara said, the tears finally coming. "Yes, I will marry you." His hands shook as he slid the ring on her finger. It fit just right. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could hardly breathe. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "On us," she corrected, and kissed him with everything she had. "When?" she asked when they finally came up for air. "I have got 2 weeks' leave in August. We could get married then. I know it is fast, but I'm done wasting time." "August, then," Clara agreed. "But we probably ought to tell folks first. The gossip will be a storm as it is. No need to spring a wedding on the whole territory." They sent a telegram to Noah first and got a joyful message right back, promising he would be there. They told the sheriff in town, who spread the news quickly. Soon, everyone in the Northern Territory knew the widow Whitmore was marrying the new marshal. Some were happy for Clara. Others were scandalized she would remarry so soon to a lawman who would rarely be home. Clara ignored the talk and focused on getting ready. She had her mother's wedding dress, which needed just a few changes. The weeks before the wedding were a blur of work and planning. Caleb finished 2 more circuits, returning each time to help her. They talked seriously about what their marriage would mean, how she would manage the ranch when he was gone, and the possibility of children. That was a hard conversation. "I cannot promise I will always come home safe," Caleb said one night, holding her hands. "But I promise to be as careful as the job allows, And Clara, if something happens to me, you will be provided for. I have already made all the arrangements. Do not, Clara said sharply, do not talk like you are already planning to die. I am not planning on it, but I would be a fool not to prepare. His grip tightened. You have already buried one husband. I will not have you face that again without support. The words hurt, but she knew he was right. They were both realists. Noah rode in 3 days before the wedding, looking happier than she had ever seen him. He met someone, he confirmed. Maria, the widow from Santa Fe. She agreed to marry me in the fall. I will be settling there. Caleb clapped his brother on the shoulder, pride shining through his sadness. About time you found something better than chasing outlaws with me. The wedding day was clear and hot. Clara looked at herself in her mother's ivory silk gown. She saw a different woman in the mirror. Not the desperate widow from 9 months ago, but a strong woman, ready to choose love, despite all the risks. The ceremony was simple. Caleb stood at the altar, his weathered face showing all the emotion he usually kept hidden. When Clara walked down that aisle, she knew she was finally home. He was waiting for her at the end of the aisle, tears shining in his eyes. They said their vows in strong voices, promising to love and honor each other no matter what came their way. When the preacher finally said they were married, Caleb kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The party afterward was a joyous affair, with the whole town coming out to wish them well. As the sun went down, they rode back to Clara's ranch. Their ranch now. In the quiet of her bedroom, they came together with a mix of passion and care. This love was different, built not on simple hope, but on a deep understanding of how hard life could be and the choice to find happiness anyway. Lying together in the dark, Caleb softly traced patterns on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked in a low voice. "Terrified and happy," Clara admitted. "It still does not feel quite real." "Oh, it is real. You are stuck with me now," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Clara Ridge. I like the sound of that." "I am keeping Whitmore for the ranch," Clara said firmly. "For business. But yes, Clara Ridge sounds about right." They had themselves 2 whole weeks together. A honeymoon they stole right from under Caleb's work obligations. Their days were spent working the land side by side, and the nights were for talking, for loving, and for piecing together a future. All too soon, Caleb had to get back on the circuit. The goodbye was a real heart-tugger, but it felt different now. He was not gone for good, just for a couple of weeks before he would be back home, back to her. "I love you," Caleb said, the words still feeling new and important. "Stay safe until I get back." "I love you too," Clara replied, and her whole heart was in it. "And you be careful out there. I did not marry you just to become a widow a second time." He rode off with a promise to return, and Clara watched him go with a mix of tears and hope. This was her life now. A rhythm of quiet days alone and precious days together. She knew better than anyone that loving someone meant risking losing them. But she had learned through grit and survival that some risks were worth taking. The months that followed settled into a pattern. Caleb rode his circuits and returned every 2 weeks to spend time with Clara. They built their marriage in those collected moments over shared meals and quiet evenings. Clara's ranch was thriving, becoming one of the most successful in the whole region. Word spread that she was one shrewd manager. As the work grew, she hired more help, but she always held on to the independence that meant the world to her. When Caleb was home, he respected that the ranch was her domain. A year after their wedding, Clara found out she was pregnant. The news brought her both joy and a healthy dose of terror. Caleb was thrilled, but immediately started to worry. "I will ask for shorter circuits," he said at once. "Not a chance," Clara countered. "I have help here and I am strong. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. I will manage just fine." And she did manage. Samuel's wife, a kind soul named Elizabeth, came over regularly to help. Caleb timed his circuit just right to be there when their daughter was born in the early spring. He held Clara's hand for hours, his tough face pale with fear and wonder. When their daughter finally made her debut, healthy and screaming her lungs out, Caleb just wept. They named her Sarah. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's pale blue eyes, and right from the start, she had a stubborn streak inherited from them both. Being a father softened Caleb in ways no one expected. He still did his job with grit and professionalism, but he always carried a small photograph of Clara and Sarah with him. The years passed. When Sarah was 3, a son arrived. They named him Thomas, after Clara's first husband, with Caleb's full support. The children grew up knowing their father's work was important, even when it took him away. The love between Clara and Caleb deepened over time, settling from a fiery passion into a steady, profound warmth. They had built something real from nearly impossible beginnings. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb came home to find Clara waiting on the porch, the very same spot where she had stood when he first rode up as a stranger. She was older now, her face telling the story of hard work and sunny days. He thought she had never looked more beautiful. 5 years, Clara said with a small smile. Against all odds, she added. The best 5 years of my life, Caleb said honestly, pulling her into his arms. Thank you for taking a chance on a worn-out lawman with more scars than sense. And thank you, Clara whispered back, for seeing strength in a desperate widow when everyone else just saw someone to pity. She kissed him softly. We have built something good here, have not we? We have built something extraordinary, Caleb corrected her. From inside the house, they could hear the bright laughter of their children playing. Outside, their ranch stretched out, prosperous and well cared for, a testament to Clara's determination. And on this porch, 2 people who had found each other through violence and desperation held on, grateful for every single moment. Clara had learned that endings could turn into beginnings, and loss could be transformed into strength. She had been ready to give up on everything. Instead, she had found a fight inside her that she never knew she had. She fought for her home, built a life from the ruins, and found a love she thought was gone forever. The Arizona territory had tested her every way it could, and she had not just survived, she had flourished. As the setting sun painted the land in shades of gold and red, Clara stood in her husband's embrace. She knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every loss, and every moment of fear had been worth it to get to this very moment. This life, this deep and unexpected joy. She had chosen to stay. She had chosen to fight. Ultimately, she had chosen to live. And by doing that, she had found everything she had never even dared to hope for. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.